Time once again for the Roundish Table. Joining us this week, Dr. Brendon O'Connor from the United States Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. Brendon, welcome.
Good to be with you.
This 47% thing, is that going to dog Mitt Romney all the way to November? Did the game change this week?
I don't think the game changed. I mean, the Democrats will talk about this a lot. They'll want their 47% to get out to vote and then add on to that. I think the debates will probably be the last hope for Mitt Romney. I mean, he can only improve from here. So I suppose Mitt Romney's great hope is that people have underrated him.
So you're saying he hasn't peaked too early?
No, not at all. I mean, he's got a bit of George W. Bush going into the 2000 election. You know, expectations are fairly low, and if he performs well in the debates, people might take a second look.
Yeah, you're laughing about it, but it is actually true that the debates are all about expectations management, aren't they? And if you go in thinking, oh, this person's going to suck, and they do okay, all of a sudden they thrash the opposition in the debate. That's often the way it works.
Indeed, and the incumbent or the person who's favourite, like Obama, has to not be arrogant, has to not sigh, as sort of Al Gore did, or even George W. Bush in 2004. They have to take the hits and look personable and not get tired at, you know, what the opponent is saying.
What about the substance of the video itself? All 50 minutes of it, it was a pretty high-level briefing for people that paid $50,000 to hear Governor Romney speak, talking about strategy. Was there anything surprising there, or was the surprising part was that it was all stuff we knew?
Well, I think it did show Mitt Romney a little bit sort of unhandcuffed, that he was a little bit more, you know, flowing from these are the inner thoughts of Mitt. His concerns about Hezbollah in Latin America might surprise some. His views on Israel and really a kind of do-nothing policy there, I suppose, might disappoint some. His economic positions, I suppose some people have said, well, this is what a corporate executive really thinks, and he's maybe moderated himself over the years. The choice of Paul Ryan has really showed him his real true self. And I suppose this video has a little bit of that about it, of saying, look, there's a way to run the world, and this is a kind of a business model to some extent.
But as far as his economic policies go, in the video, they weren't that different to what he said publicly, are they? Like, he's always been about tax cuts, etc.
Yeah, I think a little more blunt. I mean, a little more blunt on, you know, half the country doesn't pay any tax. A little more blunt on the front that there are some people out there who are doers, and there are some people who want the government to look after them. So it was probably just degrees in style, but it was interesting.
So in a way, it really sort of shows what measured language we see usually on the stump and in the media, where they don't use terms like dependent, for instance.
Indeed, and if you look at the convention speech, Mitt Romney was all about making himself seem personable, his wife, others trying to make Mitt Romney a human being. And this probably showed Mitt Romney as someone who was more comfortable with this kind of corporate crowd or very wealthy donors than maybe the average American in some regards.
If this was, as we were saying, the real Mitt Romney, last week we were talking to Tom Switzer, who was saying he was disappointed by how little Mitt Romney talked about foreign policy. Now, during this video, Mitt Romney was saying, I wish people would talk to me about foreign policy. I'd love to talk about foreign policy, but no one cares. Do you buy that?
To some extent. I mean, I think the Republicans have probably made a calculation. The election's about the economy, not foreign policy, so talking about foreign policy isn't going to win you too many votes, and Obama's got a lead on foreign policy. But Mitt Romney's views of the world, his worries about Iran, you know, obviously does have positions on these issues, and in the debates he'll be tested on those issues, and I think it'll be interesting, the contrast.
Do you think that he can repair the damage? Because it seems every time he wades into foreign policy, whether it was the Olympics in London or then after the attack in Cairo, he seems to have a bit of a tin ear.
Yeah, a gaffe machine. I mean, talking about the Israelis and or the Jews as having a cultural superiority to the Palestinians, just things that can easily offend people. Going to London, bringing the English together on the Olympics, saying really what the English had been saying, that things weren't that well organised, and turning the turning the attention on him rather than you know, being a goodwill gesture.
Having said that, when John's talking about the damage that he's done, when you actually look over the last 4 months, there's been no shortage of campaign-ending gaffes from both sides, and none of them have shifted the polls. And why, A, do you think this would be any different? And B, why? Why aren't any of these controversies shifting the polls one little bit?
Well, there's probably just a stubborn group in the middle. I mean, Mitt Romney is probably not talking about this, you know, 5 to 10% of the electorate as the key electorate for nothing. That's what his pollsters are telling him. That's what he's trying to move. That's what his campaign launch in the convention was all about, trying to reach out and say, look, I'm a reasonable man to those moderates or those independents. And that's why we didn't see him attacking Obama as forcefully as I think a lot of other Republicans would like, because the messaging they were getting was saying, we don't want that kind of divisive, polarised kind of message coming out from the independents that they polled.
Of course, the gaffe that this gaffe took off the front pages was Romney's comments over what was happening in the Middle East. And what was your assessment of that? I mean, first of all, were you surprised at the timing of this, it seemed to be such a powder keg of anti-American sentiment that just took one YouTube video to set off?
I think we've got to be very precise about those responses in the Middle East and also in Pakistan. I mean, they're very often minority groups. They're very angry minority groups, or they're, you know, very violent in the case of Tunisia, in the case of Libya, rather. But that's not the mass of the society. It's not the majority by any sort of stretch of the imagination. So I think Romney's comment, and this has, I think, been his style, is to weigh in a pretty unsubtle way, is to say there's a group of people over there that don't like us, and the president doesn't talk tough enough to them. And that was largely, I think, the strategy of George W. Bush, to talk in these very much black and white, sort of large contrast, sort of ideological terms. And Obama, I think, has been good at sort of adding a bit more subtlety to that conversation. I mean, it's got him pegged as having an apology tour and, saying things about the United States that don't present it always as strong as Republicans would like it. But I think in general, Romney was, off with his comments.
I think you just gave an excellent answer with lots of nuance, and I'm now going to do the direct opposite. And I won't have learned my lesson at all. Surely as well, there's a lot. The wars can't be popular in the Middle East at all. Like the Afghanistan and obviously Iraq, they're still not happy about. The drones, like there's something we tend to forget about in Australia. And even America, they don't pay much attention to the drones. But there are drone attacks in, 5, 6 countries in the Middle East. Al Jazeera would be talking about that kind of thing constantly, I imagine. That can't help the situation.
Yes, I mean, that and, those recent Bush-era torture cases that you talked about on the show a couple of weeks ago, acquitting all of those people, no matter how egregious some of the American actions were. That kind of thing plays poorly because, of course, it gets played around the rest of the world pretty quickly. Photos of, Abu Ghraib are still, circulate wildly. So I think for the Republicans, they just want to forget all about that. That was ancient history. And, it's Obama's missteps that are the fault of, bring on these protests and the like.
Just finally, Brendon, what is the domestic political impact in the United States of seeing those displays of anti-Americanism, the burning of a flag, the death of an ambassador? Is this going to have an impact on the presidential election?
I think that would be very interesting how Romney plays that. I mean, he sort of doubled down really on both fronts, on this 47% front and also on the anti-American front, not saying, well, maybe I spoke a little bit too soon, but, I should be saying more of this type of thing. So he's probably realised that he's got to be bold. And bold might be stupid occasionally, but bold is bold. And he, I think, will take that strategy.
Well, Brendon O'Connor, many thanks indeed for joining us at the Roundish Table this week.
My pleasure.